book, America on Film, by Benshoff and Griffin, define gangster film as a film genre that focuses on the rise and fall of a violent mobster figure. Gangster films were especially popular around the early 1930s because of the introduction of sound synchronized with film, known as the talkie. The films used this new technology to enhance the viewing experience by adding a lot of gunshots, car noises, and screams.
The early 1930s was the end to the glorification of the criminal portrayed in film. Censorship codes forced studios to make moral realizations. Criminals now had to be treated as psychopaths. For example, in the movie Reservoir Dogs, there's a scene where one of the mobsters finds enjoyment out of torturing the cop that he is holding hostage. He cuts his ear off, soaks him in gasoline, and all this while he's dancing around to upbeat music.
Well, I don't know why I came here tonight. I got the feeling something ain't right. I'm so scared in case I fall off my chair, and I'm wondering how I'll get down the stairs.
Director of the movie Scarface, Howard Hawks, didn't want to alter his movie in response to the new production code. So instead, producer Howard Hughes changed the title to Scarface, Shame of the Nation. Also, he adds the prologue describing the film as an indictment of gang rule in America. Because the Hays Code lacked an enforcing body, many filmmakers during the Depression got away with ignoring it. This became known as the pre-code Hollywood era. Amendments to the code in June 1934 established the Production Code Administration, which required all films released to first obtain a certificate of approval. They adopted this code in hopes of avoiding government censorship.
Early gangster movies have been said to turn the Horatio myth on its head, and you could say that all gangster movies do this. An important aspect of that is the Horatio stories always had a white male. In gangster movies, we would generally see people from other ethnicities. Scarface was Cuban, Michael Corleone was Italian, and so on. However, the most important concept in gangster films turning the Horatio myth on its head was crime. In the myth, a man would overcome hardship and villainy to prosper and be successful. Needless to say, gangster films are based on crime, so the myth is already shot down in that sense. Instead of going into the workforce with hard work and determination, the characters make their way up through illegal activities. The Horatio myth set out to show that the system did, in fact, work, and it allowed people to do great things. Gangster films countered this by showing characters succeeding against the system. In many films, such as Scarface, though characters were successful, the system would catch up and end up winning against their criminal lives. This showed signs of the Horatio myth still being prevalent because of the system overcoming against the non-white criminal characters. Even when the system ended up winning, though, the criminal did have success for a good amount of time, which ultimately did take power out of the myth. With all of this, it is not to say that within the criminal world in gangster films, Horatio aspects were not shown. Though the myth was based on prospering by not committing crime, characters of certain gangster films do build their way up from nothing. For example, Michael Corleone in The Godfather is a normal man who comes back from the war and then becomes the Don of the Mafia. Tony Montana in Scarface is a Cuban immigrant and a convict who then becomes the most powerful drug lord in Miami. He soon has a big house, nice clothes, and attends the best clubs. Though these characters do many things that are not part of the myth, they still do gain success in their own right, from nothing.
Most gangster movies have protagonists who are both gangsters and police, like The Departed, American Gangster, and Public Enemy. Film noir, which originated in the 40s, has been present in later films. However, film noir is more artistic, more romance-based, and shown through the detective's perspectives, as gangster films are shown through the mobster's view. So why do most gangster movies force the audience to sympathize with gangsters over police? Well, the movies are depicted in a way to make cops prevent the gangster protagonists from achieving their goals. Movies also bring the audience closer to the gangster protagonists, thus making them seem like real people underneath their violence. Gangster movies have always embodied the spirit of the American dream. Over time, gangster movies have become more realistic as opposed to earlier films, such as The Musketeers of Pig Alley and Little Caesar.
Yeah, look at us. Just a couple of nobodies, nothing. Is that what you want, Rico? A party like that for you? Cesar Enrico Bandello, honored by his friends.
Hey, I could do all the things that fella does and more. Only I never got my chance.
There were more realistic themes and situations later as well, as earlier films were a little dry on content. The introduction of vulgar language and nudity came in later films too. Drugs have also come into play in later films such as the Scarface remake, American Gangster, and Pulp Fiction. In Pulp Fiction, there's a scene where the woman Uma Thurman snorts drugs, which would be considered a double taboo in earlier films. There was also a dramatic rise in violence. Visuals of close-ups on injuries and women getting killed in films like The Departed and The Gangs of New York were shown later, too. Later films were also more gory.
Come on. Okay. Do you want to play rough? Okay. No. Say hello to my little friend! Okay. Do you want to play rough? Okay.
The violence was almost inconceivable in the 30s and 40s, and this is all due to the Hays Code.
There are many ways in which gangster films were influenced and were themselves an influence to society. Many of the plots of gangster films were taken from the newspapers of that time. The lead roles in gangster films, being the mobsters, were glorified during film.
How do you like the view here, huh? You see that? Someday I look at that sign and I say, okay, she's mine.
However, they each met their eventual demise in the final scene because of the censor's demand that they receive moral retribution. We see this in 3 of the classic gangster films. Little Caesar, released in 1930, The Public Enemy in 1931, and Scarface in 1932. Gangster films were popular because they gave the audience the double satisfaction of vicariously participating in gangster violence and seeing the violence turned on the gangster himself. This allowed them to, on the one hand, identify with the criminal rebellion against a corrupt and hypocritical society, and on the other, to enjoy the fantasy of revenge against criminals who would be seen as the root of evil. Gangster films have been and will continue to be an important part of American history and society because of their characteristics and relationship to society.